Ancient Egypt. For millennium, it has captured the imaginations, hearts, and minds of generations of truth seekers, eager to know who really built the pyramids, when they were built, and why they were built.
This documentary series is comprehensive. It's the biggest documentary series ever made about ancient Egypt. This documentary series will not only rewrite the history of ancient Egypt, it will turn the history of the human race upside down. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt. Ever since I was a child, I had a fascination with ancient Egypt. Any book, any documentary, I watched it, I read everything. But every time I saw it or I read it, something about what the Egyptologists were telling me didn't ring true. And for years and years and years, like a big jigsaw puzzle, I tried to put the pieces together. And I tried to put them together the way the Egyptologists had them. But the picture didn't make sense. And then I came to Egypt and I saw the evidence for myself. And the picture started to take a different shape. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt. Most people are aware of the three great pyramids at Giza, but the reality is there are over 100 pyramids currently known to exist in Egypt, many of them in poor states of disrepair or almost unrecognizable piles of rubble. In this episode, we will continue our examination of the history of ancient Egypt. In particular, we shall examine the 5th dynasty and review what we've been told about it and the pyramids and other structures supposedly built by its pharaohs. Were these pyramids actually built when the Egyptologists say they were? And were they built as tombs for kings and queens? Or do they symbolize something else, such as a map of the stars in the night sky? And what lays awaiting deep beneath the ground? Is it the answer, or part of the answer, to the true history of Egypt? And will the answers to those questions pose even more questions? Are there more pyramids and ancient temples, like the secrets of ancient Egypt, yet to be discovered, buried, waiting to be revealed? Join me as we explore all that and lots more as we continue our exploration of what has been referred to as the Age of the Pyramids, and we take a look at the 5th dynasty. Welcome back to our examination of the 5th dynasty of ancient Egypt. And let's pick up where we left off at the end of the reign of Neferefre-Isi.
It was King Shepseskare, the least known 5th dynasty king, who succeeded Neferefre on the throne. Although he was most likely a member of the royal family, nothing is known about him, and his relationship to his predecessor and successor is not known for certain.
The Mystery Man.
It is possible Shepseskare was a son of Saru-Re to a lesser wife, a non-regal wife, and, if he was, it might explain his contemporaneous omission from the list of kings of the period. It is also possible he was Necherer-en-Re, the twin of Nefer-ir-Kare and the uncle of Neferhefre. Even though the Turin King list, a New Kingdom document from the reign of Ramses II, indicates that Shepseskare ruled for 7 years, most of the evidence we have about him indicates he may have only ruled for a few weeks. Unlike the other kings of the 5th dynasty, Shepseskhare's name appears neither in the personal names of people of the time nor in the names of funerary estates, and he is also absent from the titles and biographies of state officials. For example, the Stellar of the 5th Dynasty official Kaupatar lists an uninterrupted sequence of kings whom he served under, namely Saru-Re, Nefer-Irkare, Nefer-Hefre, and Nusra, but has no mention of Shepseskare at all, indicating that his reign must have been very short. The only ancient Egyptian king list that mentions Shepseskare is the Saqqara tablet, his name completely absent from the Abydos king list, and Turin canon, although in this case a lacuna affects the papyrus on which the list is written right at the place where Shepseskare and Nefer-Hefre's names should have been.
So who was he? And how is it that he was able to ascend the throne?
At one time there were two competing hypotheses in Egyptology regarding the succession of events running from the death of Nefer-Irkare Karkai, the third king of the 5th dynasty, to the coronation of Nusra-Ini, the 6th ruler of the 5th dynasty. The first relied on historical sources, most notably the Saqqara king list and many those, Egyptiarcher, in which Shepseskare succeeded Nefer-Irkare Karkai, making him the 4th ruler of the dynasty with a reign of 7 years. In this scenario, Shepseskare preceded Nefer-Hefre, who was the father of Nusra, Nusra then becoming pharaoh after Nefer-Hefre's unexpected death.
But that would require an explanation as to how Shepseskare's claim to the throne is stronger than that of Nefer-Hefre's, and currently there is none. At best, Shepseskare was Nefer-Irkare Kakai's twin brother, Netjererenre, and some Egyptologists have proposed that when Nefer-Irkare Kakai died, Netjererenre may have claimed the throne and ruled for a brief reign under the name Shepseskare, although this remains a theory of some considerable conjecture. In fact, the only way that that could be so would be if Nefer-Hefre was just a child, and Netjererenre married his brother's widow, Khenthaus II, to legitimise his claim. But Nefer-Hefre was in his late teens, fully eligible to take the throne. So that scenario seems highly unlikely.
The view was challenged at the turn of the millennium, firstly by the discovery of the relief mentioned earlier showing that Nefer-Hefre was more than likely Nefer-Irkare's eldest son, and, as such, being in his late teens to early 20s, was in an optimal position to ascend the throne. Secondly, 2 seals and a few clay seal impressions bearing Shepseskare's Horus name, Sekhem-Kor, meaning he whose apparitions are powerful, were discovered in the oldest part of Nefer-Hefre's mortuary temple, which was not built until after Nefer-Hefre's death, which would seem to indicate that Shepseskare made offerings for the funerary cult of Nefer-Hefre, which favors dating Shepseskare's reign to after that of Nefer-Hefre. Although the debate continues, many Egyptologists now believe that Shepseskare was Nefer-Irkare Karkai's twin brother, Netjererenre, son of Saru-Re, and therefore an uncle of Nefer-Hefre, and that Menkau-Horkeu was Nefer-Hefre's son. They also believe that Shepseskare briefly seized the throne following the premature death of Nefer-Hefre, and that Shepseskare may himself have died unexpectedly, or he may have lost the throne to another of his nephews, Nefer-Hefre's brother, the future pharaoh Nusra-Ini. 2 other cylinder seals of Shepseskare are known. One, made of bronze, bears Shepseskare's Horus name, and was uncovered in the ruins of Memphis in the early 20th century. The second seal, of unknown provenance, is made of black serpentine and reads Shepseskare beloved of the gods, Shepseskare beloved of Hathor.
So, what if Netjererenre wanted the throne? What if, after years of being second fiddle to his twin brother, just because he was born a few minutes later, Netjererenre, overcome with jealousy, arranged for his nephew, Nefer-Hefre, to have an accident, to be murdered. Then, the throne vacant, he quickly married his twin brother Nefer-Irkare Kakai's widow, so that he would have the right to claim the throne. stranger things have happened.
Given our current knowledge that the ownership of the pyramids of the other kings of the dynasty are already known, and its location, the unfinished pyramid in North Abu Sir, about halfway between the Sun Temple of Usekuf and to the northwest of the Pyramid of Saru-Re, can only be attributed to one of two 5th dynasty kings, Shepseskare or Menkaure, the tombs of whom have not been positively identified. However, according to a number of contemporaneous documents, it seems probable that Menkaure built a pyramid in either North Saqqara or Darshur. Therefore, by elimination, it would seem that Shepseskare is the more likely of the two to have started the unfinished pyramid at Abu Ghurab in North Abu Sir.
We're going to have a very closer examination of all of these pyramids from the 5th dynasty when we get to Abu Sir later in the series. But basically, the unfinished pyramid was attributed to Shepseskare based on the assumption that as all the other 5th dynasty rulers had pyramids attributed to them, and he was the last one left, he was the logical owner. If you start with a false premise, you can only come to false conclusions.
Seemingly abandoned after no more than a few weeks or months of work, it is similar to the unfinished pyramid of Neferhefre, which coincidentally had once been erroneously attributed to Shepseskare based on the discovery of a small chapel abutting the eastern wall on the pyramid.
So why would Shepseskare start a pyramid here at Abu Ghurab, not complete it, then build a chapel in front of another unfinished pyramid several kilometers away? It doesn't make sense. Nor is it reasonable to conclude it was totally destroyed by a tsunami. There must be another explanation for this structure.
It is impossible to estimate the height it would have had, but the unfinished square platform, with a base length of roughly 100 meters, was leveled and the excavation of a T-shaped ditch was just started in its center. The ditch left open during the pyramid's construction to allow for simultaneous work on the pyramid filling and construction of the subterranean chambers.
It sounds just like the structures at Abu Rawash, Zayet El Aryan, and Neferefre's pyramid. Is it possible that the trench and the descending passage had been finished, and that perhaps there was something else to discover beneath the sand that now covers the site?
The archaeological evidence indicates that rather than 7 years as credited to him by many though, Shepseskare most likely only reigned for a few weeks to a couple of months at the most, his reign cut short by his unexpected death, or his claim to the throne could have been thwarted by Nusra-Ini, Neferhefre's younger brother and the younger son of King Nefer-Irkare and Queen Khentkhus II.
Perhaps he was murdered by Nusra, or by his mother, Khentkhus II, as an act of revenge. We just don't know.
Khentkhus II was the wife of Nefer-Irkare Karkai and, more than likely, the mother of both Neferhefre and Nusra-Esi.
Using her name as a derivative, it's also possible that she was a granddaughter of Khentkhus I, and thus the daughter of Usekuf and Neferhetepes II, or possibly even a daughter of Sahure and Neferet-Nepti, or perhaps a half-sister, meaning she was Neferefre's sister. At the very least, she was a cousin of Nefer-Irkare. She may even have married Nefer-Irkare's twin brother, Netjerenre Shepseskare, after Nefer-Irkare's demise.
Khentkhus II is mentioned in the Abu Sir papyri, and she held several titles including the title Muat Neswetbiti, which can be translated as either Mother of Two Kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, or, more controversially, Mother of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, and King of Upper and Lower Egypt, a title which she has in common with Khentkhus I, and, for some time, it was thought that the two women were one and the same, a dilemma referred to as the Khentkhus problem. However, archaeological evidence now supports the fact that there were indeed two very powerful queens named Khentkhus. The reason this title is not well understood is because of the fact there is a depiction of her holding a Hettis scepter and wearing the royal uraeus, and because she had a full pyramid complex, which some experts suggest is because she ruled as a pharaoh in her own right in ancient Egypt, or, at least, acted as a queen regent for her sons after the death of her husband.
And the ambiguity in the terms may not be accidental.
Other titles held by Khentkhous II include Great One of the Hettis Scepter, She Who Sees Horus and Seth, Great of Praises, King's Wife, His Beloved, Priestess of Barpif, Priestess of Jezepif, Directress of the Butchers in the Acacia House, Attendant of Horus, God's Daughter, and a Companion of Horus.
One thing is certain, she was a powerful woman, with sufficient prestige to be buried in the manner of a pharaoh.
The original plan of her pyramid complex, fairly small and now badly damaged, included a mortuary temple with its own satellite pyramid, all of which was enclosed within a high wall built of limestone blocks. Later the complex was reconstructed, mostly from plastered mud brick, and the temple extended towards the east with the addition of a new entrance, adorned with twin limestone pillars, erected precisely on the east-west axis of the pyramid complex.
Which tells me that the complex had been damaged. But by what? A tsunami? And repaired and extended sometime after the catastrophe? In mud brick?
It was built to the south of, and next to, the pyramid complex of her husband, Nefer-ir-Kare-Karkai, and was most likely started during his reign when her title was that of a king's wife. However, an inscription on a block of the pyramid suggests that the works were temporarily halted at around the 10th year of an unnamed king, possibly because of the death of Nefer-ir-Kare, and was subsequently resumed during the reign of her son, Nusra-ini, when her title was then changed to King's Mother. The small pyramid, because it was heavily damaged, was initially thought to be a double mastaba, and, with a base width of 25 meters, was thought to rise to a height of about 17 meters, occupying the position usually occupied by the satellite pyramids in some older pyramid complexes. This might be a simple coincidence, or perhaps an indication that Nefer-ir-Kare's satellite pyramid had been reused for the burial of Khentkhous II.
It may well have been usurped and used as a burial site during the reign of Nefer-ir-Kare. But if this complex aligns with a star map that is unfolding, then that's not necessarily when it was built, or the reason why it was first built.
In the first phase of construction, under Nefer-ir-Kare, the core structure of the pyramid was built, formed by 3 stages of small limestone blocks, the leftover remains of the material used to build Nefer-ir-Kare's pyramid, held together by clay mortar. The cladding, high-quality fine Torah limestone, along with the dark grey granite pyramidion, the fragments of which were found in the ruins, was added some time later.
And how did the pyramidion get decapitated and smashed in the ruins? Did it even belong to this pyramid? Or was it from another pyramid somewhere to the north? A tsunami seems the only answer. But when?
The archaeological evidence suggests that the cladding was first added at the same time as the limestone mortuary temple was built, later, under Nusra. The entrance is located slightly off-center along the north face, from where a corridor descends for about half its length, then continues on the horizontal and turns slightly to the east into a flat, open tomb, oriented in an east-west direction, which is very clearly preserved.
And that structure sounds exactly like the pyramids at Abu Rawash, Zayet el Aryan, Nefer-efre, and Userkaf.
Shortly before the burial chamber is a single granite portcullis.
Okay, that's enough for me. The granite confirms for me this was built way before the time of Khentkhous II, but we'll leave further exploration of the subterranean chambers until later in the series.
The simplistic layout of the subterranean chambers may also indicate that Khentkhau's II's pyramid was originally intended as Nefer-ir-Khare's satellite pyramid.
Oh, it may well have been a satellite pyramid, but who built it and when is a totally separate issue.
The pyramid was robbed during the First Intermediate Period, and sometime during the Middle Kingdom, the pyramid was reopened and the sarcophagus reused for the burial of a young child. Some of the bindings from a mummy and fragments of alabaster grave goods were found in the tomb, these remains indicating that the pyramid was used as the Queen's final resting place.
Yet another speculation and assumption. The pyramid may well have been where someone was laid to rest, but there is no proof it was Khentkhau's II, nor that the structure was originally built for that purpose. If anything, the actual evidence tells us a totally different history.
By the end of the New Kingdom, the destruction of the site occurred when stones were taken from the site to be reused elsewhere.
Taken? Or were they swept away by a tsunami at the beginning of the New Kingdom? Or maybe there was more than one tsunami. I sincerely doubt that they were simply taken away. By whom? Where? Why?
Scant evidence survives, a block showing Khentkhau's II with her husband, Nefer-ir-Khare, and a son named Ra-Nefer B, and a limestone fragment found in the pyramid complex mentioning a king's daughter, Raputnerpti, a daughter of Nusra, and hence a granddaughter of Khentkhau's II, who is followed by a king's son, Khenti-Kau-Hor. The pyramid structure has been heavily damaged such that the ruins are now merely a pile of rubble around 4 meters high, the shoddy masonry work and poor quality material facilitating its destruction by quarrying and erosion.
Or the damaged state is attributable to the tsunami and its subsequent attempts at repair.
The location of this pyramid has led to the assumption of a link between the satellite pyramid, believed to be used for the car of the deceased, and the Queen Mother.
A perfect case of polyphylla archaeology, where the truth tells a completely different story.
Although very little remains of the complex, archaeologists have determined that it was built in 2 stages, the smallest traces of a small offering chapel, which probably contained an altar, located slightly east of the center of the north side of the pyramid, near to the entrance to the pyramid's substructure,
which would have borne the full brunt of a tsunami from the north.
The original limestone mortuary temple was entered from the east through a large pair of limestone pillars painted red and inscribed with Khentkhau's name into a columned portico comprising an open-roofed pillared court with 8 square columns painted red and inscribed with her name and titles.
Clearly, painting the limestone red was to imitate the red granite, because, firstly, there were no more red granite columns to usurp, and secondly, they didn't have the capacity to quarry and transport new granite columns themselves.
Beyond the courtyard is a statue hall with 3 niches which, according to a papyrus fragment found in the temple archive, contained cult statues of the Queen, a small sanctuary and offering hall, clad in limestone, with a pink granite false door, an altar and storage chambers, and a stairway leading to a roof terrace.
I wonder if the altar was made of red granite, and if it and the false door are still in situ. Highly unlikely. But is all this an indication that Khentkhau's II assumed the throne, either in her own right or as a co-regent? There's the possibility that when Nusra eventually assumed the throne, probably due to the untimely death of his elder brother Neferefra, he was still a child, and that Khentkhau's II acted as Nusra's co-regent for a period of time, effectively acting as the ruler of Egypt. If she did, under what authority? We'll get to that later in the series.
The offering hall, as well as pillars in the courtyard, were decorated with images carved in relief, and inscriptions included scenes of offerings, a funeral meal, agricultural scenes, the procession of funerary estates, the family of King Nusra greeting his mother, one of them having a depiction of the queen with the uraeus on her forehead, a royal symbol which has been interpreted as meaning that Khentkhus II had been a reigning queen. But the reliefs are badly damaged, and what remains are a collection of fragments.
So what caused the damage?
The expansion of the mortuary temple to the east during the second phase added a new entrance, as well as 5 more storage chambers, and a dwelling for priests, made of mud brick rather than limestone masonry.
Enlarged or repaired post-tsunami?
In addition, a massive mud brick wall was built around the complex, separating it from the pyramid complex of Nefer-ir-Kare.
That sounds like post-tsunami repair work.
Constructed under Nusra, itself taking place in 2 phases. First, a small temple was built of limestone, which was later enlarged with mud brick.
And all of that sounds like a much later time than the time of Khentkhus and Nusra.
There also was a satellite pyramid located to the southeast of the main pyramid, which measured 5.2 by 5.2 meters at the base, with a height of about 4.5 meters, with an incline of around 60 degrees, built as part of the complex but with its own enclosure wall. Made from the same material as the outer wall of the complex, it was built as part of a late expansion of the complex, along with the second phase of the construction of the mortuary temple.
That doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that there were attempts to repair the pyramid using the debris left over from the previous calamity.
The cult satellite pyramid has been almost entirely destroyed, only slight traces remain, and no substructure has been detected so far. Despite this, some experts have suggested this is the first time that a queen had been given a cult pyramid as part of their burial, and that it strengthens the case for considering Khentkhus II was a ruler in her own right, and not just the wife of the king.
A satellite pyramid for a satellite pyramid. So a queen's pyramid for a queen. That doesn't make sense to me. A star map sounds more logical to me.
Khentkhus II appears to have enjoyed a funerary cult for over 300 years, until the end of the 6th dynasty.
Which would be consistent with her being a regent. But why only until the end of the 6th dynasty? Was it because, as the evidence at Elephantine Island tells us, it seems some fluvial catastrophe may have befallen the length of the Nile? And was it this event that triggered the first intermediate period? But again, more on that in a later episode. Let's return to the 5th dynasty.
Shepseskare, though it might actually have been Khentkhus II, was succeeded by Nusra-ini, the younger son of Nefer-ir-Kare Karkai and Queen Khentkhus II, and the brother of the short-lived King Neferhefre, the succession appearing to have gone smoothly. It is not sure how Shepseskare died, but Nusra ultimately prevailed, possibly because he was backed by his mother, Khentkhus II, and powerful high officials such as the high priest Ptah Shepses, who was promoted to vizier under Nusra, and whose daughter he married, receiving the honorary title of king's son. Another brother, possibly younger than Nusra, has also been proposed, a Prince Irpat, Irianre, whose relationship is suggested by the fact that his funerary cult was associated with that of his mother, both having taken place in the temple of Khentkhus II, whose pivotal role in Nusra's eventual accession to the throne might explain her high esteem in Egyptian folklore and the enlargement and upgrading of her mortuary temple by Nusra. Nusra-ini seems to have had at least 2 wives, as witnessed by 2 small pyramids located at the southern end of the pyramid field of Abu Sir, known today under the names of Lepsius 24 and Lepsius 25. Both monuments are heavily ruined and the names of their owners cannot be ascertained.
Allocating the number of wives based on the number of adjacent unknown pyramids makes absolutely no sense. It just doesn't hold up, especially when we look at the real meaning of the locations of the pyramids in relationship to the star map in a later episode.
One of these two queens might have been Ruptanap, the only known consort of Nusra, her existence and relation to Nusra attested by a fragmentary alabaster statuette of her discovered in the Valley Temple of Nusra's pyramid complex. Pieces of relief from the tomb of Vizier Ptah give the titles of a queen, and while her name is lost, these titles are the same as those that Ruptanap bore, leading Egyptologists to propose that these refer to her. It is likely Nusra and Ruptanap had a daughter, Princess Khamene'tep, as is suggested by her title of a king's daughter, her marriage to the powerful Vizier Ptah, and the connection between Ruptanap and Khamene'tep in the reliefs from Ptah's tomb, although this remains conjectural until direct evidence of this relationship can be discovered. Nusra possibly had two more daughters, one being Sheretnepti, who was married to an important Egyptian official, whose name is lost, and at least one son, whose name is also lost. Nusra-Ini is well attested in sources contemporaneous with his reign, mainly in the tombs of some of his contemporaries including Nusra's manicurists Khnumhotep and Niankhkhnum, the high officials Khufu Khaf II, Reshepsis, Neferhefreank and Karbor-Ptah, as well as in three ancient Egyptian king lists, the Karnak king list, the Abydos king list, and the Turin canon. During Nusra's reign, the evidence shows he continued to maintain trade relations with Byblos on the Levantine coast to the north of Egypt, commissioned at least one expedition to the copper and turquoise mines at Wadi Magare in Sinai to the east, and exploited the quarries of Gabel El Azhar, to the south, in Lower Nubia near Aswan. There is little evidence for military action during Nusra's reign. A few fragmentary limestone statues of kneeling and bound prisoners of war discovered in his mortuary temple possibly attesting to punitive raids in Libya to the west or the Sinai and Palestine to the east, but such statues were customary elements of the decoration of royal temples and mastabas, so they may not be immediately related to actual military campaigns. Nusra faced an enormous task when he ascended the throne. His father, mother and brother had all left their pyramids unfinished. His father's and brother's sun temples were also unfinished, and he had to construct his own sun temple, his own pyramid and mortuary temple, as well as those of his queens.
That's if you believe they were built in the 5th dynasty, and I don't.
The pyramid of his father, Nefer-ir-Kare, although well underway at the death of the pharaoh, was lacking its external limestone cladding, and the accompanying mortuary temple still had to be built. Nusra's brother, Neferhefre, had begun covering the pyramid surface with limestone and had built the foundation of a stone temple on the pyramid eastern side, but it was Nusra who completed their father's pyramid complex, although he abandoned the task of covering the pyramid altogether and finished the mortuary temple with cheaper materials than were normally used for such buildings, its walls made of mud bricks rather than limestone, and its floor simply beaten clay.
What if that was all that he could do? What if that was actually the extent of technical skills and resources at the time, and the Egyptologists have completely misinterpreted the evidence because of their beliefs of when the pyramids were built and who built them?
The outer part of the temple was built to comprise a column portico and a pillared court, all columns being made of wood rather than the usual granite.
Rather than the usual granite? What if wood was the norm, and granite was only used if in fact it was reused from a pre-existing structure?
The temple and pyramid were surrounded by a brick wall, but the causeway leading to the mortuary temple at the foot of the pyramid was never built. No satellite pyramid was added to the mortuary complex, and the Valley Temple was left unfinished.
And the Egyptologists' explanation? That Nusra ran out of time and/or resources. I don't think so.
Construction works on the pyramid of Nusrer's brother, Neferhefre, had also just begun when Neferhefre died unexpectedly in his early 20s. At the time of Nusrer's ascension to the throne, only one step of the core of Neferhefre's pyramid had been completed. The substructures, built in a large open pit at the center of the pyramid, were possibly unfinished as well.
A large open pit? That sounds familiar. Have they explored that properly?
Nusrer hastily completed the pyramid by transforming it into a stylized pyramidal mound resembling a mastaba. The walls of the core layer already in place were covered with limestone, and the top was filled with clay and stones drawn from the local desert.
No granite, no limestone blocks, just clay and stones. Maybe it was meant to be a mastaba all along. Or maybe the granite has been removed, like at Abu Rawash.
The accompanying mortuary temple, at the time a small stone chapel possibly built by Shepses Kare, was finished by Nusrer and extended over the whole 65 meters length of the pyramid side. The temple was built of mud brick and comprised the earliest hypostyle hall of ancient Egypt. The temple entrance adorned with 2 stone columns followed by a column courtyard, and its roof supported by 24 wooden columns.
Again, no granite, no massive limestone blocks, just mud brick and wooden columns.
Meanwhile, work on the pyramid and mortuary temple of Nusrer's mother, Khentkhaz II, had begun during the reign of her first husband but was stopped in the 10th year of his reign, at which point only the pyramid core was still uncased. After a delay of 12 years, Nusrer-Ini restarted the building work and expended much effort in completing the majority of the construction. Its sepulchral chamber likely housed a sarcophagus of red granite.
Well, it's possible, but it's also possible that it housed a cardboard box. Supposition is not fact.
Today, the pyramid is a 4-meter-high mound of rubble.
So why speculate it housed a red granite sarcophagus? You see, this is what happens. The speculation of Egyptologists quickly gets accepted as fact when it's not.
The Queen's Mortuary Temple, at the eastern foot of the pyramid, was the object of successful completion works during Nusrer's reign. The earliest one used stone while the latest used only mud brick.
That doesn't make sense. Clearly, this is 2 separate attempts to rebuild the temple.
Completely ruined today, the temple seems to have been designed in imitation of the mortuary temples of kings, incorporating, for example, a satellite pyramid.
Maybe it was built for a king and usurped by Khentkhaz II. Either way, it blows the theory that satellite pyramids were built for the pharaoh's queens right out of the water. Clearly, they were there for some other reason, which we'll get to later in the series.
South of the pyramid of Khentkhaz II, Nusrer built a pyramid for yet another queen, either a consort of himself or of his brother Neferhefre, although the name of the queen for whom the pyramid was intended is lost.
Her name may well be lost, or maybe she never even existed. Maybe the satellite pyramid was not built for a queen. Maybe not built by Nusrer at all. There's actually no evidence who built it, when it was built, or why it was built. Nothing.
Known as Lepsius 24, the pyramid is heavily ruined, its outer casing of fine white limestone long gone, exposing its core, made of limestone and clay mortar organized in horizontal and accretion layers.
Sounds to me like some surging mass of water simply carried the casing stones away.
Graffiti left by the builders indicate that the construction of this pyramid dates to the later part of Nusrer's reign and took place under the direction of Vizier Ptah Shepses.
Or it indicates when repair work was done or there were attempts made to rebuild the pyramid.
Reptunab, wife of Nusrer and the possible mother of Menkaure-Keu, has been cited as a likely candidate as, in the burial chamber, the broken-up mummy of a young woman, who died between the age of 21 and 23 years, was discovered. However, it is unclear whether the mummy is that of the original owner of the pyramid or dates to a later period, as the mummification method employed suggests.
Basically, the mummy could belong to anyone from a later period, but not Reptinub at all.
Excavations of the burial chamber yielded fragments of a pink granite sarcophagus, as well as pieces of large calcite canopic jars and smaller funerary equipment.
Again, pink granite. So it's more likely much older than the 5th dynasty.
On the eastern side of the pyramid, the ruins of yet another small satellite pyramid and mortuary temple were discovered, both heavily affected by stone robbing, which started as early as the New Kingdom and reached a climax during the Sarti period, 664 to 525 BC, and Persian period, 525 to 402 BC, making a modern reconstruction of the temple layout impossible.
It amazes me how Egyptologists can state with such certainty as to when stones were removed. Some during the New Kingdom, others during the Persian period. What if they weren't removed at all? What if there were a number of floods and tsunamis? What if that's what the evidence really tells us?
The ruins, known today as Lepsius 25, constitute not one but two large adjacent tombs built as a single monument. This double pyramid, known to ancient Egyptians as the two are vigilant, resembling a pair of mastabas more than a couple of pyramids.
Maybe because if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a pair of mastabas.
The wider pyramid complex was enclosed by a wall, with two large rectangular structures on its northeast and southeast corners, possible precursors of the pylons characteristic of later Egyptian temples.
And the further you go out from the sanctuary or burial chamber, the later the structure was built.
Nusra also undertook building works on the Valley Temple of Menkaure in Gezer, extending the eastern annex, where he added two sets of alabaster columns, rebuilt the main entrance, and refurbished the limestone causeway leading from the Valley Temple to the High Temple. He also possibly expanded the inner part of the High Temple, notably adding a square antechamber with a single central pillar. In the process, Nusra revived the cult of both Menkaure and Queen Khentkaus I, who bore the same name as Nusra's own mother and, like his mother, bore two pharaohs.
And that would have provided Nusra with a genealogical link relating him to his 4th dynasty forebears, which would help him to legitimize his rule following the troubled times surrounding the death of Neferefre.
Nusra also completed the Sun Temple of Yusukuf at Abu Ghurab, first adding an inner enclosure of limestone in the pre-existing court and extending the outside enclosure, then either completed or built entirely the Valley Temple. In the last construction phase, Nusra encased the inner enclosure in mud brick, added an altar and 5 stone benches to the central court, and built an annex to the temple. Oriented east-west and sitting atop a promontory on the desert's edge at Abu Ghurab in Abu Sir, Nusra's own Sun Temple, called Shesep-Ibre, or Joy of the Heart of Ra, Ra's favorite place, Delight of Ra, or place agreeable to Ra, the largest surviving temple constructed during the Old Kingdom, is rectangular in shape and, like its counterpart 500 meters to the southeast, once had 3 primary components: a valley temple, an upper temple, and a causeway connecting the two. Because of its proximity to the Nile, the valley temple is almost gone, though remains standing in shallow boggy swamp water. Built with thick walls, the entrance was a pillared portico with 4 palm columns built into a pylon-like facade of fine white limestone. In the middle of the Valley Temple there were once numerous statues, including statues of Nusra in 3 niches on the west wall, statues of captive enemies, an alabaster head of Queen Raputnerkti, and a pink granite statue of a lion, all of which only fragments have been discovered.
The alabaster definitely relates to either the Old Kingdom or possibly the Middle Kingdom. But the red granite lion takes me back to the weathered one we examined in episode 5 on the island of Philae outside the Temple of Isis. It all raises the question, was the current valley temple built on the site of an even older structure, or was it originally built as part of and connected via the causeway to the original pyramid substructure attributed to Nefertari?
Its floor was originally around 5 meters below the present ground level and was probably built upon a foundation originally laid by Nefertari. In addition, to either side of the building were 2 columned porticos that accessed narrow corridors and rooms that led into the center and to the causeway, the remains of which, like those of other sites, would have once been covered.
The causeway itself doesn't provide much information. It hasn't even been fully investigated. So why was the causeway built at such an acute angle to the temple?
The causeway steeply ascended to an impressive upper terrace, formed by extending and leveling a natural platform of rock using mud brick encased with limestone blocks, upon which the actual Sun Temple was built.
That confirms it. The original Valley Temple was Nefertari's, and Nusra was simply usurping it and or renovating it.
Although the Sun Temple is oriented east to west, the causeway was offset towards the northeast and the Valley Temple. Some archaeologists suggest that the causeway was pointing in the general direction of Heliopolis and may indicate a solar or astronomical purpose.
The general direction? That's a bit obscure. There must be a more rational reason. Clearly the location was important enough to build up and level the ground rather than build it 50 meters further west. And assuming it was the position of the upper Sun Temple that was paramount, as well as its orientation, then the causeway simply took the shortest path to the river. So could the earlier tsunami have washed away part of the banks of the original river? Then, in dynastic times, the promontory was reinforced with simple mud brick, and later, perhaps in the 19th dynasty, after more damage by the tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty, been rebuilt by Khemwaset with limestone plaster. It's all highly plausible.
The upper temple was first built in mud brick. The temple was later reconstructed entirely in yellow limestone, the only such structure to receive this treatment.
Or maybe it was made of stone first, and then repaired with mud brick after the original structure had been extensively damaged by a tsunami.
While the reason for this renewal remains unclear, it may be related to Nusra's said festival, or to some evolution in the ideology surrounding sun temples.
We'll have a good look at the temple when we get to Abu Sir, but what other evidence can we find?
The entrance was from the east, through an entrance hall that extended from the temple's enclosure wall, and consisted of a long corridor that led to a second, traverse corridor, which opened onto the temple's open court. Within the T-shaped entrance were the remains of several granite-lined doorways, including those to the left, right, and straight ahead.
Clear evidence to me that the elements of this structure are much older than the 5th dynasty.
The temple contained a large number of invaluable inscriptions and reliefs from the king's reign, including the corridor, which was once decorated with scenes of the Hebsed festival, indicating that not only did Nusra rule for at least 30 years, but that this part of the temple was probably built and decorated at quite a late stage in his reign.
It may also have been a new addition or a renovation to an earlier damaged structure. All around the site are pieces of pottery. You can see the river clay that they've made them out of, and then the browner colour after they've been fired. It's pretty primitive stuff, so you'd think it might be some of the most oldest that's here. But no, this is the more recent stuff. This is from the Ptolemaic and
the Roman era. It's everywhere and on the sites. It's junk.
The corridor led completely around the courtyard to the southern side of the obelisk, to a small, independent structure called the Chamber of the Seasons, decorated with numerous finely carved scenes depicting the 3 seasons of the ancient Egyptian year: harvest, inundation, and sowing, which is unfortunately missing. Unfortunately, many of the reliefs from this chamber were sent to museums in Germany, whereas a number were destroyed during World War II. The adjacent small chapel, to the east, before the Chamber of the Seasons, is little more than a shadow of its former self. The chapel was once decorated with scenes of the dedication of the temple, but, unfortunately, these reliefs were applied to poor quality stone enhanced with a coating of lime plaster, and were either in poor condition or, like those in the adjacent Chamber of Seasons, had also been removed to museums in Germany and destroyed during World War II.
In my view, the chapel is definitely a later addition by a 5th century pharaoh, probably Nusra.
Running parallel to the Chamber of Seasons is another narrow corridor, this one leading towards and inside the main mound, or pedestal, which formed the base of the Sun Temple's main edifice and took up most of the western half of the open court.
Because of its square base and sloping sides, the pedestal looks to me more like a mastaba, a truncated pyramid, or the first step or two of a step pyramid, maybe even a ziggurat. Is that because it originally was one?
The entrance corridor intersects with an inner corridor that once ran around part of the inner perimeter of the pedestal, sloping gently up until it reached the top of the base and providing access to the roof of the pedestal, most likely for rituals.
I can only imagine what treasures may be buried within. On the walls, on the ceilings, there may even be other corridors or chambers that run off it, perhaps leading to a central chamber, or even to a subterranean shaft that leads to subterranean chambers lined with red granite.
The pedestal had colossal, precision-cut and polished, red granite casing blocks, each weighing several tons, positioned with incredible accuracy around the base.
Clearly, there is much more here than originally meets the eye.
Atop the pedestal once stood a 36-meter-high obelisk, primarily built of limestone, that probably symbolized the Benben stone on which the sun's rays first shone in the Heliopolitan creation myth.
A creation myth involving a bird, just like other civilizations, but more on that later in the series.
Then, as if a massive hand had swatted it like a sand castle, some unknown force caused the pedestal to collapse inwards and buried the corridor, scattering the massive granite casing stones around the site like Lego blocks.
It's not an unknown force at all. It was a tsunami, or possibly several of them. The only real question is when. Although it was most probably usurped and rebuilt during the 5th dynasty, it's uncertain what it may have been before that. It could have been a pyramid, it could have been a mastaba, and that raises the question as to whether there are undiscovered subterranean chambers beneath it. And there's lots more to discuss about the Sun Temple, including an altar located in the centre of the courtyard, constructed from 5 large blocks of alabaster. But we'll leave that until later in the series when we get to Abbasia, because the Sun Temple is not the only major structure attributed to Nusra.
Nusra placed his pyramid in Abu Sir in the immediate vicinity of the unfinished ones, on the northeastern corner of that of Nefer-ir-Kare-Karkai and next to that of Saru-Re, thereby concentrating all pyramid building activities in South Abu Sir. But it meant that his pyramid was out of the alignment formed by the preceding ones, limiting its size and constraining the layout of his mortuary complex.
Their location has nothing to do with lineage and lots to do with the alignment of the constellations in the night skies. But again, more on that in a later episode.
This would explain why, despite having enjoyed one of the longest reigns of the 5th dynasty, Nusirer's pyramid was smaller than that of his father and closer in size to that of his grandfather Saru-Re.
Well, no, it doesn't. It's speculation, and doesn't make sense when you examine the actual evidence, which we will do when we get to Abu Sir.
With a base length of 80 meters, an angle of 51 degrees, and once rising to 52 meters in height, Nusirer's pyramid, called Mensut Nusirer, meaning established are the places of Nusirer, or the places of Nusirer endure, is now little more than a pile of rubble. Built of 7 steps, with a core of limestone blocks, it was entirely cased in blocks of white Torah limestone.
But was it? Or are they assumptions? And why is it now a pile of rubble? It certainly supports the theory that a massive tsunami passed through here.
The entrance to the pyramid, currently buried and blocked with rubble, is in the center of the base of the north face and leads to a corridor lined with fine white limestone and reinforced with pink granite at each end, and divided by a barrier with 2 granite blocks, after which the corridor ascends to the vestibule.
There's that red granite again, in the subterranean structure.
Following the vestibule, the next corridor is larger than the first and turns east before arriving at the antechamber, and then the burial chamber, located slightly beneath ground level and under the foundation stones. Both the antechamber and the burial chamber are lined with fine limestone and have a gabled ceiling consisting of 3 tiers of gigantic limestone beams, each 10 meters long and weighing 90 tons.
I'm sorry, I don't believe that moving and positioning blocks that size, 90 tons, is in keeping with the limited technology at the time. And there's no evidence they were. No cranes, no lifting devices, and then there's that gabled ceiling. Clearly it's functional, but what was the function?
Though there were no remains found of the king in his pyramid, it is believed that fragmentary scenes found within the burial chamber describe military campaigns against Libyans.
Apart from the military reliefs, which could easily have been added when the pyramid was usurped by Nusira, the subterranean chambers clearly collaborate our unfolding alternate history.
The accompanying mortuary temple of Nusira housed a pillared portico of mud brick encased in yellow limestone, the upper temple comprising a large rectangular courtyard entered via 5 granite doorways on its eastern side.
There is that red granite again, and I don't believe it's contemporary with Nusira. It's not consistent with other parts constructed of mud brick.
The Valley Temple of Nusira was built on the foundations laid by his father for his own unfinished Valley Temple.
As one can see by how the causeway clearly once ran from Nefertari's pyramid straight up and down from the Nile, and now how the causeway cuts across the slope to meet with Nusira's mortuary temple.
The Valley Temple consisted of a portico with 8 papyri-form columns. Its floor was of black basalt, and its walls were made of limestone with painted reliefs above a dado of red granite.
More red granite, and basalt as well. Why basalt? Because basalt is not common to this region. It doesn't make sense. He put so much attention to detail in a valley temple, but not a sun temple. Surely the Egyptologists must have asked the questions about the building materials. Red granite, limestone, basalt, mud brick, wood. Surely they could examine the artifacts and work out how they were made, and if they were contemporary with each other. After all, different materials required different tooling techniques. Anyone who had the technology to quarry, mine, and shape massive blocks of red granite would not build a temple out of wood.
The back of the portico led to the causeway, the base of which was entirely covered in basalt, while its upper portions were decorated with numerous reliefs.
Why basalt? More questions.
Beyond the main pyramid was a smaller one for the car of the king.
Or was it for his queen or some other purpose? There is actually no evidence that this satellite pyramid was built for Nusra, or that it was built for his car.
Nusra was to become the most prolific builder of his dynasty, building 3 pyramids for himself and his queens, and a further 3 for his father, mother and brother, all in the necropolis of Abu Sir.
Except there's no proof that during the 5th dynasty Abu Sir was a necropolis at all, nor that any of these pyramids were actually built during the 5th dynasty or by Nusra, but it is possible that they were repaired or reconstructed.
According to Mani, though, the 6th king of the 5th dynasty, whom he named Rothores, believed to be the Hellenized form of Nusra, reigned for 44 years, a figure which is rejected by Egyptologists, who rather credit Nusra with a figure of 31 to 34 years, that based on reliefs discovered in his solar temple showing him participating in a said festival, normally first celebrated after 30 years of rule. Although, in the eyes of his subjects he remained a living god, Nusra's reign saw the unabated growth of the priesthood and state bureaucracy. This is reflected in a multiplication in the number of titles and the creation of new administrative offices, which had started in the early 5th dynasty, particular under Nefer-ir-Kare-Karkai, and the effective birth of the nomarchs, or provincial governors, who, for the first time, lived in the provinces they administered rather than at the pharaoh's court. It also meant the priests of Ra gained even more power. As the bureaucracy expanded, the king's power slowly weakened, this situation going unchecked until the reign of Nusra's second successor, Djedkare-Ecc, who implemented the first comprehensive reforms of the system of ranking titles and thus of the administration. As with other Old Kingdom pharaohs, Nusra benefited from a funerary cult established at his death, in Nusra's case surviving until the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom, when many of the funerary temples were dismantled and their materials reused, most notably in the pyramid complexes of Amenemhat I and Senusret I. The cult may have had a revival in the New Kingdom, nearly 1,000 years after his death, when extensive restoration works in Abu Sir and Saqqara were undertaken during the reign of Ramses II under the direction of Prince Kimwaset.
The question is, what happened to the temples and when to cause them to need restoration?
Nusra was in turn succeeded by Menkaure-Keu, although the precise relationship between Nusra and Menkaure remains uncertain. Indirect evidence from the mastaba of Khentkaus III, the king's wife and king's mother, discovered in 2015, favors the hypothesis that Menkaure was a son of Neferhefre and thus a nephew of Nusra rather than his own son. The name of Menkaure, whose name means eternal are the cars of Horus, is a departure from those of other kings of the 5th dynasty, the first pharaoh in 80 years whose name does not refer to the sun god Ra. The name of Menkaure instead finds its peers among the princes of the 5th dynasty with, for example, Prince Khentikaure. The forces of Horus are at the fore, a son of Nusra-Ini, and later Prince Nessa-Kaure, a son of Djedkare-Ecc. No queens of Menkaure have been identified, although it has proposed that Kuat was one possible queen, and Queen Meresank IV another, although it is also possible Queen Meresank IV was a wife of Djedkare-Ecc, Menkaure's successor, although there is no evidence Djedkare-Ecc was Menkaure's son. However, 2 sons have been suggested for Menkaure, Princes Ra-Enker and Kar-Emtgenent, both believed to be children of Meresank IV. By the same reasoning, they could instead be sons of Djedkare-Ecc. Menkaure is well attested by historical sources, his name appearing in the Abydos king list, the Turin Canon, and the Saqqara tablet. However, very little is known of his reign, The scarcity of artifacts and inscriptions relating to Menkaure reign means that few of his activities are known, the only secure depiction of the king dating to the Old Kingdom being a rough, possibly unfinished, alabaster statuette showing Menkaure enthroned and wearing the tight-fitting ceremonial robe of the Hebsed. That said, these sources confirm the belief that Menkaure succeeded Nusra-ini and preceded Djedkare on the throne. Menkaure Ku is known to have ordered the construction of two major monuments during his reign, a sun temple for the veneration of Ra, the last pharaoh to do so, calling it Arkit Ra, variously translated as the horizon of Ra or the place where Ra issues forth. Although the Sun Temple has yet to be located, its existence is known thanks to inscriptions found in the tombs of 5th and 6th dynasties officials who served as priests of Ra in the temple. However, given the paucity of documents relating to Menkaure's Sun Temple, it probably only functioned for a short time and is now likely lying somewhere under the sands of Saqqara or Abu Sir. Menkaure Ku abandoned Abu Sir and built the pyramid for his burial in the sprawling archaeological site at North Saqqara. Originally named Necheresut Menkaure by the ancient Egyptians, meaning the divine places of Menkaure, the pyramid was originally discovered by Richard Lepsius in 1843 and is known today as the Headless Pyramid, Lepsius 24. The small pyramid, with a base of around 52 meters and aligned with the pyramid of the 6th dynasty pharaoh, Teti, was lost under shifting sands sometime after 1930 in the early 20th century.
How does anyone lose a pyramid, especially one with a base of 52 meters?
The structure was eventually excavated and rediscovered in 2008 by Zahi Hawass, the then head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities.
Zahi Hawass, that rings alarm bells for me, but more on that in a later episode. How do you simply lose a pyramid? Maybe it wasn't lost, maybe it was hidden to conceal what was inside or beneath it.
Archaeologists had to remove approximately 8 meters of sand to reach the relatively well-preserved lower levels, only the pyramid's base remaining.
Most probably like Abu Rawash, Zayet El Aryan and other structures, because that's all that was built.
The top part of the pyramid disappeared many years ago, probably removed by villagers to build houses in the floodplain of the Nile, which lies about 100 meters away.
More likely, it was swept away by a tsunami. That's if it existed at all.
In the process, they stumbled upon what Hawass says was a ceremonial processional way that runs alongside Menkaure's pyramid, leading from a mummification chamber toward the Saqqara Serapeum, a network of underground tombs where sacred bulls were interred. Built in the Ptolemaic period, a stone found nearby bearing the name of Ptolemy V, a pharaoh who ruled Egypt between 205 and 180 BC. Some archaeologists have associated the pyramid with the 10th dynasty pharaoh, Menkaure, who ruled about 400 years later, and others with the 12th dynasty, which ruled Egypt between 1991 and 1786 BC during the period known as the Middle Kingdom.
Trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Although the excavations failed to yield the cartouche of the pharaoh who built the pyramid, Menkaure was the last pharaoh of the dynasty whose pyramid remained undiscovered. Thus Zahi Hawass, and therefore other archaeologists and Egyptologists, based on the evidence that Menkaure was known from inscriptions to have built a pyramid somewhere, and by architectural similarities and a process of elimination, formally recognized the headless pyramid as belonging to Menkaure.
A process of elimination, hardly scientific, all based on the theory that they actually built the pyramids, which is not based on actual evidence, rather on speculation. We'll take a closer look at the actual pyramids in a later episode and see what the actual evidence tells us.
The entrance, on the north side, leads, via a now completely destroyed descending passage, to the simple subterranean structure, a 4.6-metre deep pit dug out by workers, which was sealed by 2 granite portcullises, now damaged by erosion, indicating that a burial took place.
Well, no. It actually just tells us that there were granite portcullises, not that an actual burial took place, as the portcullis, and their being red granite, were not contemporary with the building techniques of the period. The portcullis, therefore, must have had a different function. And how does a red granite portcullis suffer erosion when it's buried under 8 meters of sand and rubble?
Hawass pointed out the large red granite blocks at the entrance to the burial chamber were characteristic of pyramids of that period, of which there are many examples.
And I think Hawass is right. They are characteristics of when the pyramids were born, when they were constructed. I just think Hawass has the wrong period.
The burial chamber that followed contained the intact, relatively plain, grey schist lid of a smashed sarcophagus, the splitters of which are placed in a heap near the lid.
But when was it put there? And what was its original purpose?
Not all the fragments of the sarcophagus remain, but there are enough to understand the mechanism of the lock of the lid. The cover slid laterally along the angled grooves located at the top surface of the sarcophagus, creating a strong vertical fixation of the lid with the sarcophagus. To lock the lid in place, 2 holes bored into the underside of the lid contained vertical rods, and when these holes aligned with the matching vertical holes in the sarcophagus, the rods fell down halfway, thus fixing the cover forever.
That is a hell of a complex locking mechanism. Not to mention how they drilled 4 perfectly aligned holes into the schist. Pretty technologically advanced for around 2280 BC, and the only such mechanism discovered in ancient Egypt.
Beyond the construction of monuments, the only known activities dated to Menkaur's reign are an expedition to the copper and turquoise mines in Wadi Maghari in Sinai, and, based on artifacts found there, continued trade with Anatolia. Many, though, mentioned a pharaoh, Menkauhor, believed to be a Hellenized form of Menkaure, as the 7th king of the 5th dynasty, and his reign being 9 years, whilst the Turin canon credits Menkaure with a reign of 8 years. Modern Egyptologists consider his reign to have been somewhere between the two, 8 or 9 years. After his death, Menkauhor's funerary cult lasted at least until the second half of the 6th dynasty, nearly 150 years later, and reappeared during the New Kingdom period, around 1550 to 1077 BC, lasting then until at least the 19th dynasty, around 1292 to 1077 BC, some 1200 years after his death. Menkauhor Keu was succeeded by Djedkare-Essizi, the relative chronological position of Djedkare as the 8th and penultimate ruler of the 5th dynasty, both well established by historical sources and confirmed by archaeological evidence. Djedkare is attested in 4 ancient Egyptian king lists, all dating to the New Kingdom: the Karnak king list, the Abydos king list, the Sarkarar tablet, and the Turin canon, as well as in sources contemporaneous with his reign, such as the Abu Sir papyri discovered in the mortuary temples of Nefer-ir-Kare-Karkai, Nefer-Hefre, and Queen Khentkaus II, and the tombs of many of his courtiers and family members discovered in Gezer, that give insights into the administrative reforms that Djedkare conducted during his reign. The only known statue of Djedkare was discovered in the ruins of the Temple of Osiris in Abydos. Although the parentage of Djedkare-Essizi is unknown, he is generally thought to have been the son of Menkauhor Keu. The two might instead have been brothers and sons of Nusra-Ini. Another hypothesis suggests that Djedkare and Menkauhor could have been cousins, being sons of Nusra and Nefer-Hefre respectively.
Who knows? The way the ancient Egyptians interbred, he could have been all three. Personally, I believe that as there were no challenges and his claim to the throne seems to have been smooth, it is most likely he was a son of Menkaure-Kayu, and his mother was either Kuit or Meresank IV.
The name of Djedkara's principal wife was Seterpor, the owner of a large pyramid complex located to the northeast of Djedkara's pyramid in Saqqara, which could indicate that she was the mother of Djedkara's successor, Unas.
She very well may have been, but it's not evidence, it's speculation.
Only one son of Djedkara has been identified with certainty, Neserkauhor, eldest beloved king's son of his body. Neserkauhor also bore the title of Iripat, as well as a priestly title, greatest of the five in the Temple of Thoth, suggesting that he may have been a vizier or had similar occupations. As well as Neserkauhor, there is indirect evidence that princes Rar-Emkar and Khar-Emtgenent are also sons of Djedkara, Rar-Emkar also having the title of king's son of his body, a title almost exclusively reserved to true princes of royal blood. In addition, a high official named Isiziang could also have been yet another son of Djedkara, as his name means Isizi lives. However, Isiziang and Khar-Emtgenent could instead be brothers and sons of Meresank IV, or that the former is a son of the latter. Finally, despite the complete lack of evidence, Djedkara's successor, Unas, is thought to also have been his son.
It's a complete lack of evidence, but it's heaps of assumption.
Several of Djedkara's daughters have been identified through the title of king's daughter of his body, including Khekeret-Nerpti, clearly indicated by her other title of beloved of Isizi, Mere-Isizi, Hejet-Nerbu, and Nepti-Emneferes. The reign of Djedkara heralded a new period in the history of the Old Kingdom. His time on the throne, well documented by the Abusir papyri, numerous royal seals, and contemporary inscriptions, indicates a fairly long rule, his reign marked by an effort to maintain a stable economy through extensive reformation of the bureaucracy and the priesthood. Possibly as a reaction to the rapid growth of the central administration in the first part of the 5th dynasty, Djedkara effected comprehensive reforms of the Egyptian state administration and priesthood, witnessed by changes in the system of ranking titles of high officials and priestly titles, the first undertaken since the inception of the system of ranking titles. Following the reforms, princes of royal blood could once more hold administrative titles, a prerogative they had lost during the early 5th dynasty, and viziers could now hold the prestigious titles of Iripat and Hutiar and, as overseer of the royal scribes, became the head of the scribal administration. At least one vizier, Seshemnefer III, despite the fact neither his father nor his mother seemed to have belonged to the royal family, even bore the title of king's son of his body, one of the most distinguished titles at the time and normally reserved to princes of royal blood.
And the royal blood is important. The sang réel, or as the French say it, the royal blood, has been misread, misquoted as the sang Grail, the Holy Grail. More on that later in the series.
Concurrent with this trend, and the most significant aspect of Djedkara Isis's reign, was the process of the decentralization of the government at Memphis, with greater power placed in the hands of local officials slowly superseding allegiance to the central state. This was done to lessen the costs of the massive bureaucracy which had grown up during the 4th and earlier 5th dynasties, but, although the idea might have made sense, it essentially gave more power to the regions where local priests were already influential enough to order governmental administrators about, and so made the king's earlier efforts at curtailing priests' power almost irrelevant, if not impossible. Since offices and the position of vizier in particular could be inherited, Djedkara's policy of decentralization created a virtual feudal system that transferred much of the power into the hands of a few high and provincial officials. Although during Djedkara's reign not all relations between Egypt and its neighbors were peaceful, Generally, Djedkara only made regular punitive raids in Canaan, without attempting to establish a permanent dominion there, although an inscription at Wadi Magere, dating to the year of the 9th cattle count, shows Djedkara subduing all foreign lands and smiting the chief of the foreign land. Djedkara commissioned at least 3 expeditions to Wadi Magere in Sinai to procure copper and turquoise, and at least 1 expedition to the diorite quarries 65 kilometers northwest of Abu Simbel, and to the eastern desert and further south into Nubia, exploiting their gold mines. Another mining expedition, undertaken by a special group of prospectors called the Cementiu, who were under the orders of an administration official sent by the king from Memphis to Edfu, possibly set out from Edfu in Upper Egypt to the eastern desert and the Red Sea. Djedkara also organized the 2nd expedition to the fabled land of Punt to procure the myrrh used as incense in the Egyptian temples, and continued trade relations with Byblos on the coast of modern-day Lebanon, possibly even as far north as Anatolia.
Possibly as far as the North Pole, but there's no evidence.
Breaking with the traditional practice instigated by Userkaf, Djedkara did not build a temple to the sun god, possibly reflecting the rise of the Osiris cult and their emphasis on eternal life through association with the god who had died and returned to life.
Or maybe he didn't build one because there were none left to usurp.
Although the Osiris cult would not become popular until the period of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, evidence strongly suggests Osiris was already associated with death and resurrection during the Old Kingdom. The fact that Djedkara was venerated by his own cult for centuries after his death would support this claim, the Osiris cult eventually becoming more widespread and much more popular than the cult of Ra. Thus Djedkara, as an early royal adherent of the cult, would have commanded great respect from later members. The main building activity undertaken during the reign of Djedkara was the construction of his pyramid complex in Saqqara, as Abu Sir may have become overcrowded. The complex looked very similar to many of the others, the mortuary temple to the east of the pyramid and a satellite pyramid to the southeast.
Hundreds of miles of desert and sand. Even if it was fertile during the period, I don't think overcrowding was an issue.
Djedkara's pyramid, called Nefer-e-Sisi or Nefer-Djedkara, variously translated as E-Sisi Djedkara is beautiful or E-Sisi Djedkara is perfect, was built in South Saqqara. No systematic investigation of the pyramid was begun until the 20th century, when Abdul Salam Hussein and Alexandre Verrier examined it, but unfortunately their work was interrupted and their work research lost. The same thing happened when Fakhri investigated it during the 1950s.
How does somebody's research just get lost? Stolen? Yes. Locked away in somebody's safe? Yes. But lost? I don't think so. Especially when it was supposedly lost twice. And concerning the same pyramid. I think the odds well and truly put that beyond mere coincidence.
It was further investigated by Muhammad Abdul Razak in the 1980s, but at this point damage has made it difficult to excavate.
What sort of damage could possibly have been done in the 30 years between 1950 and 1980? Certainly not any tsunamis that I'm aware of. Remember from episode 4, this was around the same time as the Russians were here with Project ISIS and the building of the Aswan High Dam.
Known today as Haram el-Shawaf, the Sentinel Pyramid, because it stands on the edge of the Nile Valley, the Pyramid of Djedkara, with a base of 78.5 meters and a slope of around 52 degrees, originally comprised 6 or 7 steps and was about 49 to 52 meters high.
Not fact, simply speculation. Maybe it was never 6 or 7 steps high. Maybe it was never a pyramid and always a much lower structure.
Made of irregular pieces of limestone bound with clay, some parts of the pyramid, such as the north side, are well preserved, although the upper three layers no longer exist and most of the casing stones of white Tora limestone are long gone, stolen in antiquity, meaning today the pyramid is only about 24 meters tall.
The use of irregular pieces of limestone bound with clay hardly sounds like the construction techniques one would employ to build a pyramid. More like those used to repair or rebuild a structure, especially after a tsunami. As for the casing stones, there are those stone thieves again. I wonder if anyone has actually investigated how hard it would be for an average stone thief to prise loose a limestone block weighing maybe 10 to 20 tonne from 20 to 30 metres up the side of a pyramid and carry it back home to use for his front fence. And all in plain sight of the temple priests. It just doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that they were swept away by a massive tsunami.
The entrance is from the north, located in the pavement of the courtyard of a chapel that once stood over the opening, although the chapel is now all but gone.
Supporting the tsunami theory.
A small ceiling block with astronomical decorations, probably part of the chapel, was found near the entrance.
So, was the entrance contemporary with the chapel? Or had the chapel been built over and to incorporate the entrance? It seems highly likely it was the latter. And if that were the case, it meant that the subterranean chambers predated the Old Kingdom.
The entrance corridor angles slightly east as it descends, first leading to a level vestibule, then to a barrier consisting of 3 huge plugging blocks of pink granite.
And there are our granite portcullises again. Definitely not consistent with the building techniques of the 5th dynasty. It's all sounding very familiar.
Beyond the barrier, which still partially blocks the corridor leads to another granite barrier just before an antechamber, 3 magazine rooms and the burial chamber.
I can see how the Egyptologists had simply assumed they were all constructed around the same time. And they probably were. Their problem was in allocating the first pyramid to an Old Kingdom ruler. After they'd made that error, it was easy to keep perpetuating the mistake and name pyramids based on the names of those rulers who had actually tried to repair the pyramids, reconstruct them, augment them, or built mortuary temples beside them. I'll leave further exploration of the subterranean chambers until we get to Saqqara. Suffice to say that the evidence above the ground does not, in my opinion, support the current position regarding the pyramid being built by Djedkare. Although he might have usurped the pyramid, I strongly doubt he was responsible for its construction, its repair, and the construction of other structures such as the mortuary temple, perhaps, but definitely not the subterranean chambers.
To the east of the pyramid is Djedkare's mortuary temple, the eastern facade flanked by 2 massive stone structures, which resemble the later pylons common in the New Kingdom and Ptolemaic period. The temple's entrance hall was apparently paved in alabaster and, judging from its massive walls, probably had a vaulted ceiling. The alabaster continued into the courtyard, which had 16 pink granite palm columns inscribed with the names and titles of Djedkare.
The paving and the inscriptions are definitely from the Old Kingdom, but the red granite is definitely recycled from an earlier era. If the wear and tear and aging of the granite was similar to that of the columns on Elephantine Island, then in my opinion that confirms that they predate some giant cataclysmic flood in the distant past.
A passage led through the 5-niche chapel and the antechamber to the offering hall where there were more pink granite columns bearing Djedkare's name and titles.
That tells me that there must have been quite a temple here before the catastrophe and that it all just got swept away.
Another interesting aspect of the offering hall is that its western part was incorporated within the masonry of the pyramid and would have incorporated a false door so that the dead pharaoh could enter the room for his symbolic meals.
The way I read it is that, like at all of the other sites, the temple here that contained the false door, probably of granite, predated the pyramid or the extensions to the pyramid. I wonder if this is what Hussein, Varil and Fakhri had discovered, and why their reports disappeared, that they had all discovered the truth about the real age of the ruins.
The mortuary temple is connected via a yet-to-be excavated causeway to a valley temple, the remains of walls with reliefs, along with a few pink granite blocks, scattered about under the first houses of the nearby village of Saqqara.
Pink granite blocks? That's enough evidence for me.
The Pyramid of Djedkare has a satellite pyramid near the southeast corner of the main pyramid, which has a base of around 15 meters, is made of 3 cores, and entered from the north wall, with a descending corridor leading to a single subterranean chamber.
Although there's no further evidence, especially of red granite, it appears to be just like all the other satellite pyramids.
One might presume this satellite pyramid might be a queen's pyramid for Djedkare's principal wife, Seterphor, were it not for the presence of yet another, larger satellite pyramid, with a base of 41 meters, a slope of 62 degrees, and a height of 21 meters, not much larger than some of the satellite pyramids of other complexes, consisting of 3 steps with the construction methods similar to that of Djedkare's pyramid to the northeast, itself with its own mortuary temple, and smaller satellite pyramid to the southeast, all enclosed in its own enclosure wall, but without a causeway or valley temple. That Seterphor's pyramid has its own satellite pyramid indicates she must have had some importance and influence, some Egyptologists suggesting she may have ruled after the death of Djedkare, or played an important role in his succession, while others believe that the pyramid was initially intended for Queen Merisang IV, wife of the preceding king, Menkaure.
It's all speculation, and there's not an ounce of concrete evidence to support it. So who was the satellite built by and for? No one. And we'll get to the evidence to support that in a later episode.
The entrance to the mortuary temple is unusual in that it is south of the pyramid and from the west, where a corridor leads to a 5-columned hall, the 6 papyrus-stemmed columns made of fine white limestone aligned in a single row. The hall leads to an open columned courtyard, oriented north-south, with 16 papyrus-stemmed columns skirting the inside walls.
Apart from the unusual arrangement of its rooms, there is nothing to suggest it is anything other than an Old Kingdom or Middle Kingdom structure. However, I'm convinced that the satellite pyramid of the supposed unknown queen and its satellite pyramid, both to the northeast of Djedkare's pyramid, were not built to house an unknown queen of Djedkare, or of any other pharaoh for that matter. They are all representative of other binary star systems that form part of a constellation, a star map. The question is, are all of the pyramids and the satellite pyramids of Lower Egypt encompassed in Ptolemy's 88 constellations? Or were Ptolemy's 88 constellations based on the alignment of the pyramids along the Nile? What came first, the chicken or the egg? We'll discuss that later in the series.
Further building during the second half of Djedkare's reign include a group of mastabas constructed for Princess Khekeret-Nerpti and her daughter Tiseth-Hor, Princess Hejet-Nerbu, the courtiers Mernefu and Idu, who was buried with his wife Kenet, and Prince Nesa-Kauhor. Djedkare also undertook building activities in relation with his said festival, mainly the construction of a broad rectangular court or artificial lake around 525 meters by 231 meters. The court was located within the precincts of a palace, probably located in the vicinity of his pyramid, and included a chapel of Hathor.
and not one of these structures exhibits the complex technical skills necessary to build part of or all of a pyramid, particularly the use of red granite and the massive limestone blocks.
Djedkara also reorganized the funerary cults of his forebears, either completing or restoring the funerary complex of Nusra in Abu Sir, and reducing the number of priests necessary for the maintenance of those mortuary complexes, and reforming the corresponding priesthood. As a consequence, he may have left some of his monuments unfinished at his death, as suggested by several relief-bearing blocks inscribed with his name which were found reused in the pyramid of his successor, King Unas. Manetho relates that a pharaoh, Tankhares, believed to be the Hellenized name of Djedkara, reigned for 44 years as the 8th and penultimate king of the 5th dynasty, whilst the Turin canon only credits Djedkara with 28 years of reign.
However, the contemporary evidence gives us a much clearer picture.
Several artifacts and inscriptions in the tomb of one of Djedkara's viziers, Senejm ibn Inti, relate to Djedkara's said festival, normally celebrated only after 30 years of reign, and one of the Abu Sir papyri was found to be dated to the year of the 22nd count, 4 Akhet Day 12, constituting Djedkara's latest known date, which could correspond to his 44th year on the throne, in this case making Manetho's estimate more than likely and making Djedkara the longest reigning king of the 5th dynasty. Following his death, Djedkara was the object of a cult that lasted at least until the end of the Old Kingdom nearly 200 years later. He was particularly held in high esteem during the mid-6th dynasty, with archaeological evidence suggesting a revival of his funerary cult throughout the much later New Kingdom, around 1550 to 1077 BC. Djedkara's attempt at keeping a sprawling administration under control not only ultimately failed, it may have sown the seeds for the collapse of the Egyptian state during the first intermediate period around 200 years later. Despite the complete lack of evidence, Unas, the last ruler of the 5th dynasty, about whose reign little is known, is thought to have been Djedkara's son, as the succession from Djedkara-e-Sisi to Unas seems to have been smooth. Unas had at least 2 queens, Nebet and Kenut, who were buried in a large double mastaba adjacent to their husband's pyramid. Unas and Nebet possibly had a son, Unarzank, the king's son, royal chamberlain, priest of Mahat, and overseer of Upper Egypt, who died about 10 years into the reign of Unas, his filiation indirectly hinted at by his name and titles and by the presence of his tomb near those of Nebet and Unas. 2 other sons have been proposed, Nebkahor and Shepsespupitar, but these filiations are conjectural and contested, and all his sons are believed to have predeceased him. Unas had at least 5 daughters named Hemet-Re-Hemi, Kentkaus IV, Neferut, Nefertkaus Iku, and Sishas-Hetidut, with the status of another possible daughter, Eput, being uncertain. Unas is well attested by historical sources, with 3 ancient Egyptian king lists dating to the New Kingdom period mentioning him, the Abydos king list, the Turin canon, and the Sarkar tablet, all of which place Unas as succeeding Djedkara and being the 9th and final ruler of the 5th dynasty. However, overall, there is a scarcity of evidence dating to Unas' reign, therefore little is known of Unas' activities during his time on the throne. The primary contemporaneous sources attesting to Unas' activities are the many reliefs from his pyramid complex, but there are only 4 dated inscriptions on documents safely attributable to Unas that explicitly mention his 3rd, 4th, 6th and 8th years on the throne. Unas also left a rock inscription on the island of Elephantine, next to the first cataract of the Nile in Nubia. In addition, several alabaster vases bearing Unas' cartouche are known, a complete vessel, and additional fragments originating from Byblos, a globular alabaster vase of unknown origin but finely decorated with a falcon with outstretched wings and 2 uraei, or rearing cobras, holding ankh signs surrounding Una's cartouche, an ointment jar bearing Una's cartouche and Horus' name, and a fragment of a calcite vase rim bearing 2 cartouches of Una's. Existing trade relations with foreign countries and cities, in particular Byblos, seem to have continued during Una's time on the throne. Reliefs from the causeway of his pyramid complex showing 2 large seagoing ships coming back from an expedition to the Levantine coast. In southern Egypt, inscriptions of Unas on Elephantine Island record the king visiting Lower Nubia, possibly to receive some tribute from local chieftains or because of growing unrest in the region. In addition, a relief from the causeway leading to Unas pyramid shows a giraffe, suggesting possible trade relations with Nubia.
Or simply that they saw a giraffe.
Another relief depicts a military campaign, Egyptians armed with bows and daggers attacking Canaanite nomads called the Sharsu. However, similar reliefs have been found in the pyramid complexes of his predecessors, so they may be standard themes rather than depictions of actual events. Unas built a pyramid complex in North Sarkarar, between the pyramid of Sekhemkhet and the southwestern corner of the pyramid complex of Netjerikhet, in symmetry with the pyramid of Usekuf located at the northeastern corner, as part of a larger mortuary complex, the layout of which is almost identical to that of his predecessor Djedkare, as well as the main cores of the complexes of Pepi I and Pepi II, even down to the size and relative position of the satellite pyramid.
The same architect? Sure. But when were they built? That's the question.
The pyramid's original Egyptian name was Nefer-Isat Unas, meaning beautiful are the places of Unas, and, with a base of 57.75 meters, a slope of 56 degrees, and an original height of 43 meters, it was the smallest of the Old Kingdom pyramids.
The experts say that its small size was because it was built at a time of decreasing wealth, that Unas was being economically frugal. I don't buy that. If a star map shows the reason the pyramid is smaller is because of its magnitude and size relative to the other pyramids, then I think that would leave the self-proclaimed experts way out of their league.
In the process of construction, workers leveled and covered older tombs located in the area, most notably the tomb of the Second Dynasty pharaoh Hotep Sekhemwi around 2890 BC.
This is an interesting aspect, because did the tombs belong to the Second Dynasty? I mean, were they even tombs? Or were they from a much earlier period? And why was the location of the pyramid so important that workers had to build over the existing tombs? We'll take a closer look at that and much, much more when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
Now, the pyramid is mostly ruined, a barely noticeable pile of disorderly juxtaposed blocks and debris standing at only half its original 43-meter height. The core of the pyramid consists of 6 layers, constructed from rough blocks of local limestone, decreasing in size as the builders reached the top layer, all of which had a casing of blocks of fine white limestone, now only remaining on the lowest levels. At the base of the southern face is a section of the fine white limestone casing stones that remains. It was here that Prince Kinwas Set, son of Ramses II, had added an inscription to commemorate his restoration of the pyramid, part of which still remains.
I'm not doubting the actual evidence at all. I'm questioning the interpretation of that evidence. How can the Egyptologists know what was the original structure and what was a result of the repair work done by Khemwaset? Surely this is strong evidence of the damage done to the superstructure before the 19th dynasty, most likely at the end of the 17th dynasty when a massive tsunami washed over the land. Khemwaset would hardly have taken such credit for minor maintenance or repairs. It would had to have been something substantial, the sort of damage done by a tsunami only 300 years earlier.
Before the southern face there was once an altar, shaped in the hieroglyphic sign for a hetep, most likely an offering table, and, behind it, a stellar.
No doubt usurped or cherry-picked for some museum or for some other reason.
As with the other similar pyramids, the entrance was through the pavement in the courtyard of the chapel, a single room that was once situated before the northern face of the pyramid.
Now long gone, no doubt washed away by the tsunami that struck from the north. It may once simply have served to house the entrance to the subterranean chambers.
The entrance slopes down via a descending corridor and horizontal passage, originally blocked by 3 granite slabs, to an antechamber and burial chamber, both of which originally had gabled ceilings painted with yellow stars on a blue background.
3 granite portcullises. That confirms my earlier dating of the subterranean chambers. But more on that, future episode.
Little was found within the pyramid. Unis's sarcophagus of grey wacre was sunk into the floor on the western side of the burial chamber, his canopic chest in the floor to the southeast, parts of 2 small knives used during the opening of the mouth ceremony, and barely a few mummified fragments of bone were found, although it is not clear whether they belonged to Unas.
A few mummified bones hardly confirms the presence of a mummy in the sarcophagus. Sure, the bones might belong to Unas, but without DNA testing, they could also belong to anyone from any dynasty.
This unremarkable-looking pyramid attracts little notice, except for curiosity over what it contains in its subterranean chambers, for Unas was the first king of Egypt to have the interior of his tomb painted and marked with inscriptions, which have come to be known as the pyramid texts, a practice that would be followed in the pyramids of the subsequent kings and queens of the 6th to 8th dynasties, and until the end of the Old Kingdom around 200 years later.
All of which we shall explore when we get to Saqqara.
The mortuary temple that follows, adjacent to the pyramid, is largely destroyed, but follows the plan of his predecessor, Djedkare-Isesi. 2 weather-worn square red granite columns, crudely carved with hieroglyphs, including Teti's cartouche, form the doorjambs of the gateway at the entrance to the temple, built and commemorated not by Unas, but by Teti, Unas's successor.
Is this an indication that the outer temple was built by Teti from the remains of a much older temple, and that the inner temple was built by Unas? Unlikely, but worth considering, as it was a definite trend during the New Kingdom, as we shall discover later in the series. Or did they simply usurp the red granite from some previous temple?
A large entrance hall, the remnants of the floor paved with alabaster, then leads to a pillared open court surrounded by magazine chambers. The outer temple has several large late-period shaft tombs to the side of an open court that would have once had 18 red granite palm columns around the perimeter depicting the names of Unas. These columns are no longer here, but some have survived by being reused in the Delta at modern Tanis and in the Louvre and British museums.
Surely it's about time that these pilfered trophies were returned and the temples rebuilt. What good are a few columns in the corner of a museum compared to visiting the actual reconstructed location? Besides, with today's technology, they could easily replicate the columns for their museum displays.
The shaft tomb is huge, too big to consider it a tomb, and seems to be just outside, or very close to, the northeastern edge of Hotep Sekhemwi's 2nd Dynasty underground tomb.
And that seems too much of a coincidence. Was it really a shaft tomb, or a shaft cut to remove large objects from beneath the surface? Because that's what it looks like to me. And if it was a looter's shaft, was it really dug in the late period? Or are we just being told that to cover up some 20th century treasure hunting?
To the north of the outer part of the mortuary temple are several recently reconstructed structures, the private mastaba of Nebet and Kenut, 2 queens of Unas.
Mastabas. Any half-blind amateur can see These weren't mastabas, they were residences. For starters, they don't even look like mastabas, and they're not underground structures. They look like houses, including having a porticoed courtyard, and they line the causeway and are positioned outside the temple. Looks like houses of the rich and famous to me.
The court in turn leads into the mortuary temple proper, the inner part consisting of an offering hall abutting the pyramid, which housed 5 statues of the king, with the usual false door made of pink granite, parts of which are still in place, and where the offerings to the deceased took place.
Yep, pink granite, no doubt usurped by Yunus for use in the mortuary temple.
The Valley Temple, located on the shores of an ancient lake, led up via a causeway, a covered passageway over 700 meters long, making 2 turns, probably to avoid other buildings and to connect to the lower section of causeway, links the Valley Temple of Yunus to his mortuary temple. It may have originally run from the Valley Temple to Netjeriket's complex, meaning the Valley Temple may have actually originally belonged to Netjeriket.
Or someone way before then.
The interior led through a slit in the roof that would have run along its full length. The causeway was lavishly decorated with high-quality multicolored reliefs of the Egyptian seasons, processions of people from the nomes of Egypt, craftsmen at work, offerings bearers, battle scenes, and the transport of granite columns for the construction of the pyramid complex. This transportation, depicted on unique reliefs found in Yunus causeway and in the autobiographical stela of an administration official reporting the transport of 10-meter tall palm-form columns of red granite from Elephantine to Saqqara in only 4 days, a feat for which he was praised by the king.
Is that proof the columns were actually quarried and made in Aswan? Or were they usurped from other older ruined temples there, like the ones we observed back on Elephantine Island, for instance? Or is it an explanation of how they may have been transported? And were the granite columns quarried and designed specifically for the temple? Or were they salvaged from another place, another time, and usurped by Yunus for his own temple?
Other reliefs included hunting scenes of giraffe, lions and leopards, agriculture, metalworking, and battle scenes with Asian enemies. There was also a haunting representation of emaciated Bedouins on the lower part of the causeway that appears to show the hardships during the Old Kingdom and may be connected with the famine stela on Serhel Island at Aswan, which supposedly documents a 7-year famine during the reign of King Netjeriket.
All in all, it must have been very impressive in its time, and there has been considerable work put into restoring sections of it. But does it confirm history, or does it confuse history?
At the southeast corner of the enclosure, though virtually nothing remains, was once a small satellite pyramid for the car of the king.
So how do the Egyptologists come to the conclusion this small satellite pyramid was for the car of the king and was not built for one of Yunus's queens? This is the problem with speculative theories. They are often inconsistent. What the satellite pyramid really was, we'll find out in later episode.
The duration of Yunus' reign is uncertain. Many, though, mentions a pharaoh, Onos, believed to be the Hellenized form for Yunus, reigning for 33 years at the end of the 5th dynasty, a figure that fits well with the 30 years credited to Yunus by the Turin canon, and which is supported by scenes of a said festival found in Yunus' mortuary temple. However, the scarcity of artifacts datable to his reign, as well as the lack of documents dated to beyond his 8th year on the throne, along with recent excavations of the tomb of Nekori Sisi at Saqqara, have yielded evidence in support of a shorter reign of around 15 years. In either case, it is most likely his probably son, Yunerzang, having predeceased him, that Yunus died without leaving a male heir to the throne. Yunus' most immediate legacy is his funerary cult, which continued at least until the end of the Old Kingdom but may have survived the chaotic First Intermediate period and continued into the Middle Kingdom, around 2050 to 1650 BC. The epicenter of this cult, not the Pyramid of Unas nor the associated mortuary temple, but rather the statues of the king in the Valley Temple.
Why? Because the pyramid and mortuary temple were destroyed?
This may also explain why the popular cult of the deified Unas continued for nearly 2,000 years, as shown by the numerous scarabs bearing Unas' name found in Saqqara and dated from the New Kingdom, around 1550 to 1077 BC, until the late period, 664 to 332 BC.
I'm just looking at the soil here at Saqqara, composed of a whole lot of rubble. For example, look at these rounded stones, various colours, various types, the sort of things you would find in a riverbed, not out in the desert. That's caused by water erosion at the bottom of a riverbed, not by wind and sand. And then pieces that are broken up because of some sort of activity. This whole area is covered with this sort of stuff. Not the sort of sand you would find in the desert, but something that has been swept in here from somewhere else.
In spite of all this, Unas' funerary complex was partially dismantled in the Middle Kingdom, and its materials reused for the construction of the pyramid complexes of Amenemhat I and Senusret I.
Dismantled? Or in ruins because of a tsunami?
Manetho states that with the death of Unas, the Fifth Dynasty came to an end, the growth and decentralization of the administration in conjunction with the lessening of the king's power that continued under Unas, ultimately contributing to the collapse of the Old Kingdom some 200 years later. In addition to Manetho's statement, the Turin King list presents a special breakpoint between Unas and his successor Teti, and, although the Turin King list is not organized into dynasties, which were invented by Manetho, it does raise the question of why there was a distinction between the two dynasties, especially given that the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom most likely had no concept of a dynasties, meaning the distinction between the 5th and 6th dynasties might be purely illusory.
I think there was a distinction, and it had something to do with the bloodline. With Unas not having a male heir, but more importantly, with a male outsider who did not have a bloodline mother marrying into the bloodline. More on that in a later episode.
Whatever the basis for Manetho's choice to end the 5th dynasty with Unas, Egyptians living at the time probably perceived no particular change from one dynasty to the next. The administration of the state shows no evidence of disturbances, and many of the officials continued their careers from Unas onto and into Teti's reign in the 6th dynasty.
From what we have observed, the evidence from the 5th dynasty is scant at best, and what concrete evidence there is seems to be totally at odds with the traditional history proposed by the majority of Egyptologists. Conflicts of building materials such as red granite, limestone, basalt and wood, and the techniques required to source and transport some of them, often over hundreds of miles, leads me to the conclusion that the Egyptologists of the past have fixed their dating of the pyramids to two things. Firstly, that of Khufu and the Great Pyramid, and secondly, the presumed logical development architecturally and structurally of the pyramids. As a result, they have attributed all the subsequent pyramids and their adjacent temples in a somewhat ad hoc process, based on random discoveries and misinterpretations in which they made numerous false premises and plugged the gaps with a type of polyfiller archaeology born out of speculation, assumption, and romanticized storytelling. But from within the academic sandstorm, a totally different history is emerging, one based on actual factual evidence. But the final picture's not clear yet. We need more evidence. So join me in the next episode when we examine the 6th dynasty and complete our examination of the age of the pyramids.